So what I want to show you here is how we can make hair for this character. And then I'm also going to include a couple other ways that we can add some other features like eyebrows and eyelashes, especially for something more stylized. So the first thing I want to do is build out the hair cap. I have my whole head and my character's unwrapped, and it's important that I'm unwrapped because it's going to make it a lot easier to work with. I want to separate parts of the head to help me create what we call a cap, because it's going to let me filter out just the geometry I need so that I can decide where the hair goes. It's a pretty common technique, especially in games, because making caps that are based on topology for your model let you make something reusable. So I've selected the boundary edges, and in my select tool, I'm going to come over to take a look at my lasso select. I'm going to make sure I turn on my see-through mode with Alt or Control Z. And I'm just going to add some selection to everything here. I have to hold Shift, I suppose, because I want to add to what I'm making here instead of remove from it. When I've done that, I'm going to go back to Tweak and just remove one or two of these extra hairs. So we see this is, and I'll maybe add this row too here. And I have now an area where the hair is. And I'm trying to do my best. If for instance, your character had like sideburns, you'd want to go down and hit these up too. My character doesn't though. I only want to really go this far. Might need to go further over the brow. I have a pretty high, but this might be pretty good here. And I'll remove that one. I think this feels about where I want to be with this. So just something, maybe stair step it, but because you don't want to get too close to the temple. This is probably pretty good right here. Okay, so what I'm going to do is take this, I'm going to hit Shift D, and you can see if I drag it, I get the object, and if I right click it, it stays right there. So it's still there, it's duplicated, we can see it, but it's undone. And I accidentally, let's do that again, Shift D, right click, and I'm going to hit P, and I want to do by selection. So then now I have this, which is my hair cap. We'll call it that. So my hair cap will be the basis and starting point for my hair. And I'll show you like a couple ways we can approach this hair. Let's say I was going to make a very short hairstyle, like a hairstyle for like a parted hairstyle like that a person might have with even thick hair or really tight to the head. Well, all I would do with that is take my hair cap, and I'm going to make a duplicate just so that I have a backup. And I'm going to select it, and I'm going to give it a little thickness using my solidify modifier. So let's give it an offset of 1. Ooh, wrong object. I want to be on this one. There we go. Put the solidify on here and set the offset to 1. Give it a little thickness, as much as is reasonable for the hairstyle. And then I'm going to apply all of it. And this is going to be almost like that like polygonal Lego person hair. And then maybe you say, this is pretty close to what I have. But I'll show you how we do it if you wanted to like sculpt it. So I'm going to take my hair, I'm going to select this object, I'm going to go into sculpting, pop into this view, and we don't want to be in X symmetry because we don't want to mirror it exactly. A hairstyle shouldn't be perfectly mirrored. We want it to have a little left and a little right. And now what I can do is actually add some resolution to this using the same retopo method I used before. And I'm just going to smooth some things out, add some detail. And then I can take things like my inflate tool and create, maybe something like a hairstyle with a little part running through the sides. So I'm going to inflate some areas here, just smoothing it out. And then I might take my draw sharp, F, and just start drawing wherever my part is. And I don't want my part to come all the way back, just far enough. And so maybe just run it a little bit here. And I might even use using draw sharp, a little bit of a lift to my hair, G, F, and I can start shaping it from here, just treating it like I would any other piece of geometry. This kind of technique is great for short haircuts. It's great for men's haircuts or like a woman's pixie cut. And if the hair was really tight to the head, this would be a really good approach for things. And when I was done, I can just retopologize this, or even just do a low decimated version if I so choose. But retopo is probably a pretty good approach for this to get the shapes that you want. Sometimes I might take like a clay strips and use it to build up some, you know, the idea of like where the hair would go. This is often a first step, especially for when like doing polygonal or stylized hair. And if you want like an underlayer for hair, it's a really nice thing to have that we can then build hair on top of. So as I mentioned, good for, you know, using a little draw sharp, maybe pull some stuff out, draw some little strands in, and kind of carve that back. And it's even okay if a little bit of scalp comes through because, well, depending on the hairstyle, maybe you can see the scalp running through it. Maybe not that severely. You know, maybe it's a little bit more subtle than that. I have to go down a little bit. But it's, you know, generally pretty close to this spacing. So this is like the simplest approach. And then in object mode, I might take something like this, shade it smooth, and then reduce its overall size if I wanted to, using a couple of decimates. So Shift D, I might do a decimate collapse, bring that number down. And we can see I'm not really losing a lot detail-wise. And then maybe do a decimate planar. It's cutting down even more stuff, and then finish it off with a nice triangulate. And we can see wireframe-wise, it's given me, I mean, it's not beautiful geometry, but it's simple and it's small enough and it fits the size of my head. So again, simple hairstyle. Let's look at some other approaches. Let's say I wanted to do something a little bit more complicated, like a spiky kind of a hairstyle, or something that I needed to control a lot of hair strands on. Well, one of the techniques I really like to use for this, and I'll probably use for this character, let's go ahead and delete this. Let's bring my other, I'll just hide it because I might want to bring it back. Let's get my other hair cap in here. I'm going to give it another duplicate because I'll probably use more than one of these. Hide that. Another technique I can use is to actually hand place some paths which can be used to make hair, especially like longer strands. So let's hit Shift A. I'm going to do a curve, and I want to add a curve path. Curve paths are really handy, but I want the pivot, we can see by default is in the center. I want it to be at the end, so I'm going to go into edit mode and say GX1. And actually, let's do it one more time, GX1 again. So AGX1. And this way it's on the pivot, so when I'm placing the hair, it goes where it wants. And now what I have, if I take it, is I can have a curve that I can control with this. Let's take it and shrink it down a little bit to get it to more of a hair length. I'm going to turn on my face snapping here and set it to back face culling. And align rotation to target can sometimes work well here because it can sometimes help like align the hair in the direction of wherever the head is. And so I just hold control and I can sort of snap that down. And now in my curve editor, I can come in and give it like thickness, and I can make like a round strand of hair and use this tool to help curve it out. And I can use in here, if I'm selecting it, the radius to thin out certain areas. So I could like reduce the radius and place this as, you know, like a little curved out object, which I can make, then take this, Shift A, duplicate it, position it, and then change this movement here and make a whole second strand of hair and go through the whole head and start making hair this way. Now, an even better way of doing this is instead of trying to control it with those curves, we can actually add objects to my roundness and my taper. So Shift A, I'm going to go curve, and I'm going to add a circle. And this circle will be my bevel object. So I select this, I go to object, Shift select this object, and this is going to become thickness of my thing. Well, let's see. Oh, I was on the wrong guy. I want to be on you because I can't select myself for it. Great. And it's really, really thick here, and that's because this whole object, it's its scale. So it's its thickness that's going to determine it. So now I have this visible object I can use to change its overall curvature. But not only can I change its curvature, I can change its shape. So check it out. If I take it and I flatten it, sort of like so, like curve it down, we can see on her head it's creating like flatter hairs. And I can go even further than that. If I go into edit on this, and I say like a SX, and maybe I even scale these little handles. Let's get these handles up. Let's say S. Z. Really take this S, Y, and we're creating a sharpness, and then maybe I select these. V gives me handle. I can set it to vector, and I can create it like pointier, and we can see it gives me like this cool strand look because it's trying to replicate the shape of this. But what's really neat then is instead of needing to like control manually those thicknesses, I can add another object. So Shift A, let's go to curve, and I'm gonna add a Bezier object. C, Z, and I'm gonna sort of C and middle mouse to drag that out. And now in my hair, I can set this to say our taper object is gonna be this Bezier curve. And so now the thickness of my hair sort of like, doesn't matter relatively the size of it, it's how far, let's go to use this tool. It's like how far away is it from its own center line. So that if I want to make the ends a little thicker, I can put that there. And then I can use these curves, ideally from this angle, to determine the overall curvature of the hair. Come back into this, scale that up. And now, you know, as they say, off to the races. So it's really easy now for me to L to select a whole hair and Shift D and move it into place. And then it's really easy to adjust the scale and size. And it's fun to just sort of like, I find like moving, you know, doing the hair this way is a really fun and interactive way of doing things. So I can just keep adding those and placing them by hand around the head until I get it. And I might use some combination of the two. So I might use the base of one. And let's go, speaking of which, I'm gonna hide this grouping, hide this head, and I'm gonna get that other hair cap that I was working with back. What if I wanted to make this a hair that was like brushier or like had that like rougher kind of texture to it? Well, I could also add to it, which might help under all of this. Let's turn off these modifiers, and instead I'm going to add a deformation modifier or displace modifier, turn its strength down by quite a bit, and then if we add a texture to it, something like clouds, and we can adjust the size, we can add a rougher kind of a texture to it. Depth will give us more detail. And then in our strength, we can crank this up like so to like really add a lot. And maybe before I do this displace, let's add a subdivision surface to go before the displace to just give it more geometry to work with. Gotta be careful going too far. I might crash my computer here because I got a lot going on. You always gotta be careful with that. I add a lot of displace. After it, I can add a smooth. And then after that, I could do a bunch of those kind of displacement and flattenings, and it sort of gives me that like really wavy and can give you that really cool thing. And then we can play with some of the different shapes in here, especially with like a color ramp to change up like how, let's say, add another curve into this color ramp. And we can change like the relationship between the highs and the lows, and you can get some really different looks to the sort of wave or the sort of shape of your hair. So it's a way to do like a thicker haircut. Now let's say we got like a lot of stuff. Like I'm thinking about like big shapes, like I want to do like a dreadlock or something like that. So a way we can do this is by using a combination of some of these other techniques. So I'm going to make a simple object, mesh, and I'm going to make a cylinder. I'm going to give it the number, let's undo this because I want to give this cylinder like a more reasonable number of sides. So let's say mesh, cylinder, 32 is too many, let's say 8. And I don't want, I'm going to do a triangle fan for the cap. That seems reasonable. And then I'm going to say S, Shift Z. And this is going to become the basis of my, my sort of head, my hair. Let's pull this out. In edit mode, I'm going to Control R, and I want to add a lot of divisions along it. Just enough that I have to go along it. 3. Let's take you and just GZ, move this down. Or better yet, actually, I'm going to take these edges all here and Control B. Oh, before I do that, remember I got to freeze my transforms, all transforms, just to make sure my scale's proper. So now if I do B, that'll work a lot better. Something like that. We don't want too much. So I can take this shape as I have it here, and I need to make sure, I'm gonna need to make sure it lines up properly, which it won't right now. I need to, because it needs to run this way, because I'm gonna use it with the hair system. So RX90 to rotate it. And then I'm gonna just G and move it until it lines up about there. Great. So this is gonna become, it's a little low too. So G, Z, put it right up on that dot. That's what we want. Great. Now what I can do is take my head and add one of those hair systems. And we've used this for stuff before, but of course not for a lot. Let's apply this mirror first, so it's on all sides. And this would be way too many hairs, and of course, as you can see, they're also way too long. So under emission, let's set the number down to like, let's start with 100, and let's set the length a lot lower. So now what I can do is take this hair, I'm gonna select this object here, let's right click it to shade it smooth, and let's go ahead and say, add modifier, and let's do a particle instance, and let's set it to this. And then all I have to do is say create along paths. So looks a little goofy, but that's okay. I want to control then the size and space of this object. So if I go to tab, I can scale it down. Let's do Shift Y to sort of thin it out to get the thickness I'm looking for. And if I want it to go like into the head a little bit, which I think I do, let's just GY, push it back, and it will push it into the head a little bit. So now what I've got though, and it looks like I don't have a lot to work with now. I'm like, okay, great, you've got this chunky weirdness here. But if I choose the scalp here on the hair, and I go to my particle edit, this now becomes like a brush that I can control my particles with. Ooh, I don't like that it's flattening them out though. I might not be doing, I mean, it works for this style if this is what you're looking for, but I actually don't like that it's flattening out, but that's okay. I actually have another way that we can do this particular style. As we can see, I can brush across, but it's not liking the interpolation between them. So I'm gonna go ahead and delete that really quick. I'm gonna show you how we can go from this kind of hair to the kind of hair I wanna have. So in my particle edit, let's go back to that, and I can kind of take this and use my particle edit brush. It works a lot like the sculpt brush. And I can brush out the hair in the directions I want. So maybe something like this, like get some of the hair going this way. And I want it having like a pretty up shape to things. So it can still come down, but it's sort of like wherever my hair is gonna go. And we can use this as a shortcut to doing the NURBS kind of thing I was showing you before, where we use NURBS hair. So now say I brush it into a general shape that I want. I can take the hair and come into my modifier tab and say convert, which turns it into now actual geometry. And I can convert that geometry I just created, convert to curve. And with convert to curve, now it's a curve, which means it can follow all of the same rules of shape that I was working with before. Yeah, much more what I want. And that's gonna let me pop into it now, and I can take individual curves and start tweaking and changing their shape. Of course, it's great if you do your sort of tweaking and shape changing ahead of time, but you know, not so bad. Especially if you kind of hit L and you focus on one piece at a time. Hit fill caps. So I've got a lot of these now. think, do I have enough to do a Bezier? Because that's even a better one if I can convert it. Nah, it's not going to do it the way I want it to. So there you go. And this is all editable, and it can all be converted to a mesh anytime you want. And you can create some really cool hairstyles out of this. And I can just take this whole thing and afterwards add like a subdivision surface to like round it out once or twice and then turn it into my final hair. So a couple different techniques and approaches for doing it. You can sculpt it by hand. You can bring these strands out. I really like the NURBS approach. It's really nice. The hair system's cool, but it's not as good as I would like it. Of course, I'm not going to show you the way you actually render hair and stuff like that. It's too intensive for what we're doing this course. But this should be a good start for most of the hairstyles you'll need for it. In the next video, I'll show you how to do some quick eyebrows and eyelashes.